Good afternoon, and it's such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you here. And I'd like to thank the foundation and particularly Corinne for this very kind and slightly intimidating invitation for today. I'm going to talk about distributive and social equality. And to explain a little bit about this before I get going, I'm a political philosopher, and I've been working on questions of distributive justice almost all my life, I suppose. And within contemporary political philosophy, there have been two different ways of thinking about equality. So one is distributive equality, where we think about economic inequality, we look at graphs, we look at trends, we think about what is it we're worried about? Is it money? Is it happiness? Is it standard of living? Is it something else altogether? And we think about the ways in which the world is unequal in those respects. And that is a distributive question about who gets what and whether that is equal. When I started out as a political philosopher, all my teachers were working in that area, all the people who were influencing me. But I was always a little bit worried about it. Because when I thought about what attracted me to the idea of equality, it didn't seem to be so much a question about whether everyone had the same income or not, or whether everyone had the same goods. What I was interested in was the question about how people relate to each other. That is, how we regard each other in society. What are our relations? Are we in a society where some people are having to look up and others are looking down? So this is a notion of social equality rather than distributive equality. And for me, when I eventually came to formulate my own views, I realized what I was interested in was not so much what it is to have an equal distribution, but what it is to have a society of equals, which may or may not be the same as equal distribution. So that's the basic contrast I want to try to get across to you. And I'm sure you understand this. I'm sure many of you have had similar thoughts about what is the fundamental nature of an equal society? Is it one where things are shared out fairly, or is it one where people relate to each other in particular ways? Or maybe it's both, and it probably is both, and they're probably related. So what I'm going to do is to show you some of the background of how I came to this thinking and maybe some of the outstanding problems, remaining problems with the approach. So, and I'm going to start off really taking up some of the themes that Corinne has already introduced superbly for us. I'm going to start in a place which may not look like the right place to start, but I hope you see why. And this is the notion of equality of opportunity. Now, in a way, equality of opportunity must be one of the most popular ideas in contemporary political life, I think, in all countries. That if you were to do a survey and ask people who's in favor of inequality of opportunity, you probably wouldn't find many people putting up their hands. They might say, yes, I believe in equality of opportunity, but, and tell you something. But it's actually quite hard to find people who don't agree with equality of opportunity. But my question is, do they all agree on the same thing? That equality of opportunity is a term, and as a term, it could stand for many different ideas. And I'm going to initially introduce three different ways of understanding equality of opportunity, and then add a fourth to it. So the first notion of equality of opportunity is a simple one of anti-discrimination. So this first idea is that if you advertise a job, for example, you should look at the CVs of the people, you should look at their qualifications, you could look at their ability. You shouldn't pay any attention to the color of their skin or their religion or other irrelevant attributes of them. What we know is that we are far from achieving equality of opportunity, even in this fairly minimal sense. There's been quite a lot of research where people have sent in the same CVs but with different names, revealing different ethnic identities, sending in different photographs, black skin, white skin, wearing a headscarf, not wearing a headscarf. And surprise, surprise, in every place this has been done, the person who looks like the majority culture is much more likely to be called for interview than the person who is not part of that, even if the CVs are identical. So this work is ongoing, and what we realize is discrimination still exists, probably implicitly rather than explicitly, mostly. It's probably people just picking up cues that they're not even aware that they're doing. So even on this first level of equality of opportunity as anti-discrimination, we've still got somewhere to go. That's the first idea of equality of opportunity as anti-discrimination. The second idea is comes from this thought. Anti-discrimination says, give the job to the person with the best CV, to simplify. But then we say, well, suppose people have different opportunities to acquire a good CV. Suppose people didn't have the same educational opportunities. Suppose some people went to schools that were poorly resourced, other people went to schools that were very well resourced. Is it fair? And I'm at Oxford University. This is a discussion we never stop having. How do we make our admissions fair? How do we make it the case that we somehow compensate for people who've had poorer educational background? Should we? Is that unfair to others? Should there be a lottery? Should we do some sort of remedial education? But we're trying to make the competition fairer by allowing people to acquire the same qualifications. So the first level of equality of opportunity was simply anti-discrimination. The second goes further and says, no, we should make sure people have equality of education behind that. And of course, some countries do much better at this than others. But still, we can go further. Because we can think that even if people have the same education, the same educational opportunities, life is not constituted only by being at school. That being at school is only part of the background for each person. And what happens in their home life can be even more important sometimes than what happens at school. So naturally, we think of people with the advantages of wealth and those who may have grown up in poverty as a comparison. But there's also other interesting research that says things we may not have realized can be very fateful. So for example, I won't do it, but sometimes when I'm giving a lecture like this, I ask people to put their hands up if their parents or a member of their household read them bedtime stories when they were young. Now, in a successful audience, yeah, all your hands will go up, I assume. Or if they don't go up, you'll have a special story to tell me about why they didn't, right? So I've heard people growing up in multilingual households where this doesn't happen so much. And so I gave this talk to some students, and someone came up to me very worried afterwards and said, my parents didn't read me bedtime stories, should I be worried? But you can see the point that there is incredible correlation between people who have read bedtime stories and people who do well in life, and people who were not read bedtime stories and don't do so well. Now, why is that? Many complicated layers of causation. But you can see this is something that is going to be very hard for a government to do something about. What are we going to do? Have social workers that go around to people's houses to read bedtime stories? But so we can see these things that are outside our control can affect equality of opportunity. So normally the most radical notion of equality of opportunity says we have to take these three separate factors into account: anti-discrimination, equality of education, and somehow take in home life and family background and wealth and so on, and try to neutralize all that. And only then we will have achieved a world in which, to put it in the words of the American philosopher John Rawls, people with the same talent and the same motivation have the same chances of achieving successful positions. Okay. People with the same talent and the same motivation have the same chance of success in life. So that is one way of thinking about equality of opportunity. And it's much more radical than we have achieved in any society. And I think it's probably more radical than we can achieve even if we put all our effort into it. Because as Rawls himself says, for as long as the family exists, we will never achieve full equality of opportunity. Because people will grow up in different family circumstances. So we will never achieve full equality of opportunity. Now, the reason why I have gone through this equality of opportunity, other than I find it fascinating in myself, you may not, I apologize if you don't, but the reason why I've gone through this is that we end up in a position which converges with a particular theory of distributive equality. And this theory says that people should be completely equal unless their own choices, their own freely made choices, lead to inequality. So on this view, we should compensate people if they have bad luck in life, but if they make bad choices, that's their own lookout, or if they make good choices, then they should get the benefit. So this view says we should equalize background circumstances as much as we can, and then let people make their own choices and bring about their own success in life or not. This is a notion of distributive equality because it says share everything equally unless there are good reasons for inequality, and those good reasons are people's individual efforts. So it tries to combine a view about individual responsibility with a background theory of responsibility, of equality. So it tries to combine responsibility for individual choices and background equality. This, for a long time, was the dominant theory in egalitarian left-wing theory of equality of the sort that I was acquainted with as a graduate student and as a junior academic. As I said in my opening remarks, I wasn't convinced by this theory. So why not? What were my reservations? Well, you might have the reservation that it's impossible. We're not going to be able to do it. Well, I'm a philosopher. That's an important question, but it's not the only question. So we can think about things even if they are impossible. We can think about ideas even if we can't bring them into reality. Although, of course, I spend most of my life thinking about issues around policy. But here are two problems. Let me go back to that definition of equality of opportunity. Here's the first problem. The definition said that people of similar talents and motivation should have the same chances for scarce opportunities, scarce resources in society, should have the same chances of success. So people should be placed on a level playing field. We very often hear this expression. Equality of opportunity is putting people on a level playing field. Well, when do you need a level playing field? Well, you need one if you're in a race, if you're in a competition. So equality of opportunity, understood this way, presupposes that life is a race with some scarce goods. And what we're trying to do is make life as fair as possible for people to compete for those prized positions or the rare goods. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, think about raising your own children. When you want to give your children a life of rich opportunity, what do you mean by that? Do you mean you want them to be first in every race that they run, come top of the class, be the best piano player, and so on? Maybe you do. Maybe you do want that for your children. But maybe what you want is for them to have lots of opportunities. Maybe they should go to a drama class. Maybe they should try out sports. Maybe they should try out playwriting. Maybe they should try out singing. They should do lots of different things. But notice these are things that every child could do. That is, they're not competitive. And so I want to, first of all, introduce a distinction between competitive opportunity and non-competitive opportunity. So one way of thinking about this is with swimming, children and swimming. So children go in for swimming races, one wins the prize. But when I was a child, and I'm sure it's true for many people here and for your children, there was something else you could do in swimming. In the UK, it was called getting your green badge. And this was a national scheme whereby I think you had to swim a length, jump into the water in your pajamas and take them off, and tread water for 30 seconds. And then you got the green badge. And then if you did something else, you got the red badge. And if you did something else, you got the gold badge or whatever it was. But every child could do this. And the fact that one child had got a green badge didn't mean there were fewer green badges to go around. Everyone could have a green badge. So there's this other sense of opportunity that I feel is more enriching. It's not about making the conditions fair for a race, but rather giving everyone the opportunity to flourish in their own way or to achieve things in their own way, which is not necessarily competitive. So it's very peculiar for me that people who are interested in equality would want to reduce equality to a fair race for scarce positions. Wouldn't it be much better to try to envisage a world where everyone can flourish and actually maybe get away from competition and think about it in this more sort of 1960s hippie fashion, which appeals to me? Everyone should have prizes. But these prizes are not worthless, because if you think about the swimming certificate, it's not given away for nothing. You have to work for it. And if you get it, your life is going to be a little bit better. Maybe you can go on a type of holiday you wouldn't have been able to do before, and so on. So we can give people the opportunity to acquire things that will help them in life, but doesn't rule out other people doing the same thing. So that's my first reservation about equality of opportunity. Here's my second. The key notion of equality of opportunity, as I've described it, is one whereby if things are down to you, if things are down to your choices or your work, you get the benefit. But if it's a matter of bad luck, it's not your choice or it's not your fault, then maybe you get benefits from the state or some sort of compensation. So to think about this, think about unemployment benefit. So in societies that have this type of approach to equality of opportunity, they will say, yes, you can have unemployment benefit, but only if you're unemployed through no fault of your own. What does this mean? There has to be a test to see if you could work and you're not working. So we need some way of working out who is at fault for their decisions and who is not at fault for their decisions. This is very close to means testing or capacity testing. And it is or can be utterly humiliating. So just in the case of my own family, my mother was working for a doctor. She was a receptionist for a doctor and unfortunately got ill, quite sick. She caught tuberculosis from one of the patients. So she was entitled to disability benefit as a result. And this went on for several years. But every year she had to prove that she was disabled. And the way this was done, we lived in a small village, and some doctors would come from the city, and all the people claiming disability benefit would have to line up outside a hall and go and prove that they were disabled. So in my mother's case, because it was a lung disease, she had to take off all her clothes and blow into a bag in front of 3 male doctors that she'd never met to prove she was disabled. So this was utterly humiliating for her. And you think, well, what sort of society puts people through this? It's not a society that believes in equality, or it doesn't seem to be, or not my idea of equality. It's a society that wants to make sure people don't cheat the system. So we've spent a lot of our lives and a lot of our resources setting gates up to stop people cheating us. And it's incredible how much we spend trying to catch free riders or eliminate free riders. Whereas a society of equality might say, let's get rid of all this gatekeeping. And yes, some people might exploit us a little bit, but we can put up with that. It's a more humane society in which we allow some free riding than put 2% of GDP or 5% of GDP into trying to stop people cheating. Now, of course, these are experimental questions. If we opened everything up, perhaps we would be exploited much more. So I think these two problems that equality of opportunity is competitive in the way I described it, and it requires us to have this type of capacity testing, which is humiliating for the people we're trying to help. So it's the people at the bottom who have to go through these tests. Rich people don't have to go through capacity tests. It's the poor people who do, and they're the people we're trying to help. So these two views pushed me into a different way of thinking about equality. So what I have said is equality is really about respect for everyone rather than about distribution of stuff. So the traditional way we think about equality is about distribution of things. I'm saying it's about respecting individuals and thinking about what it is to live in a society where we show respect to everyone. Now, at this point, you might say, well, this is very interesting in theory, but what does that actually mean? What is a society of equals? What are these relations of equality that happen between individuals? Is it just being courteous and polite to each other? Well, that sounds a bit too easy. But what more can we say about the positive relations of equality? Now, here I'm going to do something which you may think is a cheat. One thing that is very clear to people like me who believe in social equality is that we know what we're against. We know what social inequality looks like. Social inequality looks like discrimination, we saw, but also exploitation, hierarchy, dominance, social exclusion, oppression, violence. There are lots of ways in which societies can be socially unequal. And my approach is to say that's really all we need. We need a theory of inequality, of social inequality, and then we've got plenty of work to do. Because what we should be doing, in my view, is looking at inequality or injustice and looking at the most serious cases of injustice and trying to eliminate those, rather than worrying too much about what a theory of justice would be or a theory of equality would be. Now, the suspicion here, and I hear every time I give this talk, is how can we talk about injustice unless we've got a theory of justice? Or how can we talk about inequality unless we've got a theory of equality? Now, this is a fascinating question, and I've written a long paper about it, but I'll give you the short version. Think of the term exploitation. Think about exploitation. Almost all of us, I think, have seen conditions of work, maybe we've been in them, that we regard as exploitative, unjust because they're exploitative. Does any of us have a theory of exploitation which explains why certain things are exploitative or not? That is, we seem perfectly capable of pointing out exploitation without having a theory about when exploitation comes to an end. We might not know, it might be a gray area, but we think there are these clear injustices without having a theory of justice. It's a bit like having a sense of grammar for your own language. I can remember someone asking me what is the rule for when you should use some and any in English? I had no idea there was a problem with using some and any in English. It had not occurred to me that anyone would ever confuse some and any. I had no idea what the rule is, but I sort of got it right all the time. And if it was wrong, I would have been able to pick it up. So you can have an instinct for when things go wrong, even if you don't have a theory about what would be right. Now, in the case of grammar, there is a rule. In the case of justice, maybe there isn't a rule. But I think the same thing about inequality and injustice, that we should focus on the negative, and we can do that either because we don't think there is a positive, or more concessionary, we do it because we think that we can make a lot of progress by focusing on the way the world goes wrong, rather than thinking about what would be a perfect world. I just want to make one more comment, maybe two more comments, and then I'll finish and hand on. So one of the things that I have said is that people who believe in social equality are opposed to the idea of hierarchy. Now, this is also something that very often I get questioned about, because people say to me, how can we have a society without hierarchy? Now think of an army. Could you really run an army without hierarchy? Could you run a business without hierarchy? We do need to have hierarchy. And I concede that point. I concede that there are good reasons for having individual hierarchies in our society. What I oppose are group hierarchies, class or caste or other types of group relation where one group regards themselves as superior to another group. And I've never heard a good argument for why there should be group hierarchy in society as opposed to individual hierarchy. I mean, the only argument that I know of is we can't get rid of it, and that may be true. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make as many steps as we can to mitigate the problem. So my last point, in some of the background information for the forum, there was an intriguing question, which was, what is the optimum level of inequality? Now, for me, you might think, you might already see, this is not a question that's going to be easy for me to answer. Because first of all, I don't think of equality and inequality in quantitative terms. There isn't a number to put on how socially unequal a society is. And I also think of equality and inequality as multifaceted. So society can be equal in some respects, no hierarchy, but unequal in others, maybe gender division or exploitation. So I can't answer that question. But I just want to leave you with this alternative way of thinking about equality, not about distribution of goods, but relations between people, and particularly trying to avoid noxious relations of inequality. So thank you for listening.